love to think that someone, after seeing some of this interview, would pick up Matthew's Gospel and just start reading it. Have you got any tips for them? What are the major themes they should be looking out for to help them navigate this ancient text?
I think the first thing that they should remember is that Matthew is jumping into the middle of a story. Matthew is going to stress fulfillment, but fulfillment of what? It's fulfillment of the Old Testament scriptures. And Matthew will repeatedly say, this happened to fulfill what the prophets said, so on. This happens about almost a dozen times in Matthew's Gospel. So Matthew is trying to tell us that a crucial turning point in history has happened, namely that the promises that the Old Testament gave are in the process of being fulfilled in a dramatic way in this person named Jesus. And that's why you have the whole story of Jesus. You have this miraculous birth. You have this teaching which has authority that transcends any other rabbinic teacher. You have the miracles, which transcend any miracle worker or charismatic healer of the ancient world. So you are being introduced to the person who is the key person in fulfilling these promises that God had made in what we call the Old Testament, in the Scriptures. So that's probably the main thing to remember. And then to fit everything into this narrative about what Matthew calls the kingdom of heaven, which is the rule or reign of God, the new relationship that can exist between God and humanity because of who Jesus is and what he comes to do in terms not only as teacher and healer, but especially in terms of the Messiah who dies to make atonement for the sins of the people.
Matthew devotes a huge portion of his gospel to that last week of Jesus. Why is that? What's Matthew doing when he stresses that?
Well, that's typical not only of Matthew, but as you know, but of all the Gospels. In fact, the second half of Mark is, for example, passion narrative material. And the reason for that is that Jesus has come not primarily to teach or not primarily to heal, which a lot of people think he did come for, but he comes primarily to die. So I think of the description of the Gospels as passion narratives with extended introductions. That's, I think, a very good description that the basic story of Jesus is the cross. That's why the cross is a symbol of Christianity. The basic story is that this Messiah comes to die for the sake of the sins of the people, and the rest is, in a sense, preparation and prologue. His teaching, his healing, important in itself, but not the main part of the story. The main part of the story is that he comes to die.
We've stressed the historical context of Matthew and Jesus himself, but what's the modern relevance, the 21st century relevance of these ancient texts?
Well, these are ancient texts, but at the same time, there's a huge amount of overlap between human beings, the nature of human beings and their plight, their situation, and God. So that although the trappings of the stories, the trappings of the cultures are very different, the first century being very different from our culture, the 21st century, but on the other hand, the longings, the fears, the frustrations of human beings, the reality of suffering, the reality of death, these are common elements for humanity all through the ages, from the first century, early from the beginning, down to the present. So that means that the same kinds of human problems that people had in the time of Jesus are still around. And the God who sends Jesus as the Savior has an answer for those problems, and that answer hasn't changed.
To finish, do you have a favorite passage in Matthew's Gospel, and why?
That's a hard question, because there are so many wonderful passages in this Gospel, and I love the Gospel so much. I suppose if I had to choose one today anyway, it would be the passage in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus says, "Do not be anxious about your life," and this wonderful idea that God is the one who provides for us and will provide for us, and that we are called to make the kingdom our priority, and then we don't need to worry about anything else. Put God first, and then we are in God's good care.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.